Hello from Helsinki, I'm Tom from Rebel App Studio, and today we'll be taking a tour around the Flutter Navigator 2.0 APIs, first of all looking at why you might want to use them in your app and how to do so. Rebel App Studio is a specialist Flutter agency based here in Finland, and we're a new offshoot from CodeMate, where we've been using Flutter since 2017. Which means, and this feels a bit crazy, that this year we hit our 5th anniversary of using Flutter. We use Flutter to build amazing apps for our customers, such as for the Finnish mobile phone operator Moi, where we built both the mobile app and then brought it to the browser using Flutter for Web. And we've also been working on Flutter itself, partnering with Google to, amongst other things, add features and improve the usability of the Flutter dev tools. So let's dive in and look at why you might want to use this new API, or why you might need to use this new API. And just a word on the naming, all the Flutter documentation refers to this as the Router API. I will try to call it that rather than Navigator 2.0. Navigator 2.0 was kind of used while it was in development, and people, including me, are still kind of in the bad habit of calling it that. So let's get this example app up and look at the classic Navigator and how that works and why it maybe isn't quite enough here. So with this example app, it's kind of a word processor where we start off with a list of the documents, user taps their document they want, and we call the good old navigator.of_context push and the document root. And so the user gets that document on the screen, and then we call another push after they tap that comment, and they're on the comment page. And everything is wonderful and great. And why isn't this enough? Why do we need anything else? Why must we have something new to learn? And, well, the first answer there is we might not. The kind of classic Navigator push API, there's nothing wrong with it. It does a great job. It's a really simple and clear API. And if it does everything you need, if you just want to push pages based on a tap of a button, then that might be just all you need to do. Just call the classic push method. And if you're learning Flutter, I would probably just stick with this and not go anywhere near the new routing API. Also, if you're just starting a new app, you might just want to stick with kind of the good old push. It's actually quite easy to move to the routing API if you need to do it later. I've added it to a couple of apps where we've needed the new routing API, and it hasn't really actually taken that long. Now, the thing with the Navigator push is it does have some limitations. And the main thing here is, what if you wanted to push all of those 3 pages onto the stack at once? You can't really just keep calling push. It doesn't work. You end up having to have hacks in place to kind of disable the animation. It's not nice, and it doesn't really do it. And, well, the question there first is, why would we want to do that? Why do we want all these 3 pages on the stack? And the biggest reason, I think, for mobile apps at least, is deep linking from a push notification. So here we have a push notification that there's a new comment, and we want to take the user directly to that comment screen, but still have that navigation stack in place as if the user has navigated there. So if the user presses the map button, they can get back to the document and maybe fix whatever they need to fix on it based on that comment. And then the other big reason is if you are bringing an app to web, you need URL support, probably. Maybe not all web apps need that, but I think most would want that if the user wants to bookmark a page, or if the user wants to share a link with another user. You need to go from that web URL to this stack of documents. And there's a couple of other reasons, like state restoration. So if the app gets killed in the background, you might want to restore the navigation stack there. Or if you just want to jump to this stack from somewhere else in the app, well, that's a thing sometimes, that you just want to completely replace the navigation stack. And yeah, how would you want to do this? So I guess you'd want something like a list, right? So homepage, document page, comment page. And there's good news, because that is exactly how the routing API works. You can spin up a Navigator and just give it a list of pages like this: homepage, document page, comment page, with the IDs of the document and the comment. And the good news here is that the Router API allows you to do all this deep linking, web URLs, all of this stuff. It does it. But there is a bit of an issue here, which is it maybe is a bit too flexible. And yeah, generally Flutter is very good at kind of leading you down a path of obviousness, I would say, of giving you kind of a way of doing things which is fairly easy and you can just get on with things. But if you look at the architecture diagram of the routing API, there's quite a few arrows as to how it all works, all of these different parts, and then there's all these different objects you need to implement. It's all a bit complicated, and frankly, it's not very Flutter-like. And so let's take a look at what this practically means in terms of code for your app. To implement all the bits here, to implement navigation in your app, and web URLs, and all the setup for deep linking. When the routing API was announced, they released a sample app along with it to show how it works. So let's go through the various bits of code in that sample app and see what you need in order to implement this. So first we define a set of path objects to represent the different pages of the app. Then we define an app state object to define the current state of the app's navigation and to notify the router when the state changes and the navigation needs updating. Then in our build method, we use that state object to determine which pages are on the navigation stack using a load of if statements. To implement URLs for the web or deep linking, we have to implement a method which returns one of the path objects from earlier based on the current app state. Then we need to implement another method which, based on the path that last method returns the actual URL string to show in the browser address bar, and then in order to go back the other way from a browser URL to the correct stack of pages, we need to implement a function which passes that incoming URL and returns one of the path objects, and then we need to implement another method which takes that path object, updates the global app state object from step 2, which will notify listeners and rebuild the navigator with the correct pages, and then we need to implement a pop page method in order for back to work, and then we need another pop page method because we have nested navigation, and yeah. And then when we take a look at what this sample app actually looks like, well, there is a list of books here. You can tap a book to go to a details view, and then you can go to the settings tab, and that's it. It's maybe, I would argue, quite a lot of navigation code for not that much app. So yeah, it's fair to say that this doesn't really scale, even to a fairly simple mobile app, let alone a full-blown web app or a desktop app with kind of responsive design. You end up with a lot of complexity. It's so much more complicated than the classic Navigator.push, and you end up with a lot of code to maintain, which, yeah, not great. The Flutter team have kind of said this, that they know this is a fairly low-level API, and yes, there is a lot of complexity that this API needs to support. The number of different operating systems that Flutter now supports, and especially web as well, it doesn't maybe sound like it, but there are lots of differences in how the different navigation work, how the different navigation patterns work across the different platforms. So iOS has no back button, whereas Android does, and then the web has back and forward and the URL to deal with as well. Yeah, doesn't sound like much, but it does introduce a lot of complexity, and as I say, it's a fairly low-level API and not great for day-to-day development with. So, yeah, what's happened? Where do we go from here? Flutter community to the rescue. Hooray! And we have got a load of great packages that try to solve the complexity here, that try to make this problem a lot simpler to deal with on a day-to-day basis. My friend Mike, who also lives here in Helsinki, has made this lovely chart of all the different navigation packages he found on pub.dev. As you can see, there's quite a few of them, and it is maybe a bit difficult to know where to start. This feels a bit like state management to me, where pretty much all state management packages do the same thing, just slightly differently. And with the navigation packages, it's pretty much the same deal. They take a URL and they turn it into a load of pages and put that on the navigation stack. Pretty much the same thing, and they just do them slightly differently. So just with state management, it's kind of hard to know where to start. And where I would suggest starting is, well, with the Flutter favorites that are now available. So there are 3: Beamer, GoRouter, and Routemaster. GoRouter is by Chris Sells on the Flutter team, and Routemaster is actually by me. I was very honoured to find out that my package had been made a Flutter favourite. It was a big privilege. And yeah, I thought because Routemaster is my own, we'd have a little look at that. But I just want to say these other packages and many other navigation packages are awesome. As I say, they all do the same thing in slightly different ways. Other packages, for instance, are using code generation. If you like that, great. Personally, it's something that I prefer to avoid with navigation, but that's just my own personal preference. Yeah, they're all great. They all end up pretty much doing the same thing in different ways. So, try a few out, have a look at sample code, and see how you get on. But yeah, Routemaster, I spent most of my life living in London. Routemaster is the name of these old classic London buses. That's where the name comes from. And if we take a little look at some code samples as to how this works and kind of how it compares to the full low-level API that you saw earlier, I think you'll see it's a little bit simpler. So this is how you configure the routing using Routemaster. You create material app.router and you pass in a Routemaster delegate, which kind of handles most of the complexity for you, or at least tries to. You set up these different routes, very similar to many backend systems of defining URL paths. So here we have 2 different pages. And then, so it will default to page 1, and then we can either call Routemaster of context push or replace in order to go to page 2. And then with nested navigation, for instance, if you want a tab view, here is how you set that up in Routemaster. So on the left, you can see that there is a route map, which specifies a tab page with the child of a home page and the 2 different paths, which are the 2 different tabs. And then on the right-hand side, you can see the homepage widget itself, which simply defines 2 standard Flutter widgets of the tab bar and the tab bar view. And it grabs this tab page object, which Routemaster provides, and this is all you need for URL routing with tabs. One other thing from Routemaster is that you can swap route maps kind of on demand. This is a very common thing that you need to do with routing, particularly with apps that support login. So when you're logged out, if you look at the top route map here, it just defines 1, which is the login page. And if you try and navigate to anything else, it has this on unknown route handler, which just redirects back to the login page. Then you would have another logged in map with all your actual app routes. And then in the Routemaster delegate, you can just look at your state, and depending on whether the user is logged in, it will return the correct route map, and done. This will handle everything. You don't have to worry about guarding individual pages and checking if the user is logged in. They just won't be able to access them. Now, as I said earlier, it doesn't actually tend to be that complicated to move from the classic Navigator.push APIs over to one of these new routing packages. It tends to cause maybe less chaos than you might think in an established code base. But there is one bit of refactoring that tends to pop up again and again, which is we are very, very used to being able to do this kind of pattern of having an object in memory and just being able to pass it to the next page. So for example, if we are on a page with a list of documents and we have those documents in memory, well, it makes sense to just hand that document object over to the next page. The thing is, if we are running on the web and we're adding direct URL support to go to that document, well, when that document page is shown, that document just isn't going to be in memory. You're going to need to fetch it from wherever it comes from, a database or whatever. If we look at a routing setup in Routemaster, so you can navigate to /document/ whatever the ID of that document is, and the document page will just receive the ID, which is just a string for that document. And that documents page is going to need to handle retrieving that and possibly dealing with errors. If that document doesn't exist, you'll probably want to show a 404 page or something like that. I thought it might be fun to have a look at a real-world app that's using Routemaster, and I am kind of excited by this because I've actually been helping out an app team on a forthcoming really exciting Flutter app to add Routemaster support and handle quite a few fairly complicated navigation scenarios, and that app is Superlist. It is an awesome upcoming Flutter desktop app, and I'm really excited by it, and I'm really excited that I can show you it now as a sneak peek if I just switch over to my Mac. And yeah, here we are, Superlist. It is just awesome. I have been blown away at how good a job the Superlist team have done on this app, and it's just by far the best example of what you can do with Flutter for desktop, and also writing productivity apps, the kind of app we maybe haven't seen before with Flutter. And yeah, they needed a little bit of help with the navigation, things like adding deep link support. They were using the classic Navigator APIs, and we helped them move over to use Routemaster to navigate around. And I thought I'd just give you an idea of how that works with the various paths and how the navigation works. So as you can see, the kind of homepage here is a list of my tasks, and I've added a ugly readout of the current page up here. Sorry, Superlist team, for ruining your nice design, but you can see this is the path /Superlist/ my tasks. If I navigate into this FlutterVikings talk task, you can see it has called Routemaster of context and just pushed this string, this path, onto the stack, which has brought up this detail view in the right-hand card. One of the interesting challenges with Superlist was that it needs to be responsive, so if I resize this, it shrinks down into just one task, just one card view rather, and you can navigate back and forth using the back and forward buttons up here. So how this works with Routemaster is it goes backwards through the current path. So it starts off here at the end going, okay, we've got task 2, we need to build a object to a widget to show that, a page object to show that. So that is this right-hand card. It then keeps going back through the path and finds that it's got the My Tasks page here. So it builds that page, and then it embeds it all in a homepage widget. And this results in being able to copy a deep link and send it to someone, and they can open it up, and that will open up their Superlist app at this exact navigation stack. And even with an app as complicated as Superlist, with all its responsive design glory and needing to support both desktop and mobile, it wasn't actually massively disruptive to the codebase to move from the classic Navigator.push old APIs over to using Routemaster and the new routing APIs. Generally, it's kind of a one-to-one swap. You used to push routing objects onto the Navigator, so calling Navigator push and then a material page route, for example, moving over to just pushing a route, which is just a string. So one-to-one swap doesn't tend to be that disruptive. You just then need to add a list of routes and you're done. Were a few more complicated things with Superlist than that with the kind of card views, but yeah, most apps it will be not that much work. Anyway, that's pretty much it for this tour around the routing API. Just time to look at a summary of what we have been through. And yeah, the The main point here is you might not need any of this. If you do not run into the limitations of the classic Navigator API, if you don't need deep linking support, if you don't need web URL support, you might be able to just stick with the classic APIs and be absolutely fine. This is one of the parts of Flutter that I feel like you can very much benefit from doing on-demand learning. When you know the limitations of the classic Navigator API and you know when you need to learn one of these new routing packages or the base API, then just do so on demand when you need it. There's no need to move over to this if you don't have any need for those things that I've talked about. Learning the actual API, maybe not that useful. As you saw, it's fairly complicated, and yeah, you might be able to get an idea of what is going on behind the scenes, but I don't think in the main that is useful for most people. I think it's much better becoming very familiar with one routing package and just using that. And so, yeah, that's my main recommendation. Pick a routing package based on your preferences. There are lots. They do the same thing, but slightly differently. And just find one that suits you and run with that. But yeah, that's it for our tour around the new Flutter routing APIs. I hope you've enjoyed it and not got lost along the route. This has been an interesting journey for me, writing Routemaster and learning about all the different navigation issues on the different platforms and trying to make one API that works across them all. It is a really interesting and difficult problem, both for the Flutter team themselves and for people writing routing packages. Even if you ignore supporting all the different platforms, if you just take, for instance, Android, which seems to be the most fun one that comes up again and again, I asked last year on Twitter, Android users, if you open an app and then just switch tabs, press the back button, what should happen? And there was basically a 50-50 split between what people thought, and then there were some other people replying that something completely different should happen. So yeah, just supporting Android is a challenge in itself. When you add web into the mix as well, it becomes quite complicated. But I think the community is doing an awesome job in moving this forward and coming up with really interesting new ideas for packages. And yeah, I think it will give us lots of fun for years to come. But thank you very much for FlutterVikings for having me, and thank you for joining me today.